Close your eyes and picture the first American. You probably see a hunter with a spear, standing over a mammoth carcass. A family by the fire, a huge slab of meat on the spit. Plenty, dignity, epic. That picture was painted by textbooks, museum dioramas, decades of documentaries. The archaeology of the last 20 years says something else. That picture is a lie. Their trash pits are not full of mammoth bones. They are full of crushed turtle shells and mounds of river snails, and lodged in their teeth particles that would keep a modern nutritionist awake at night. Today we flip the map of ancient America, the map of food. We look where no one used to look. Inside kitchen middens, inside dental calculus, inside coprolites, fossilized waste. This is a menu 15,000 years long, from Ice Age hunters to early Holocene gatherers. We walk that road step by step, from a mammoth carcass to a handful of crushed seeds. And we watch the body change, the teeth change, the very idea of food change. You will learn which plants they taught themselves to neutralize, which animals went into the pot whole bones, fur, shell, and all. You will hear what scientists find in mummified guts and in the soil under ancient hearths. And by the end, you may look at your own dinner a little differently, because what we call normal food is a very short chapter in a very long story. For most of that story, people ate nothing like what you imagine, and they survived precisely because of it. Let's start with the loudest picture, the mammoth hunt. Around 15,000 years ago, North America was home to animals that exist nowhere on Earth today. The Columbian mammoth, 13 feet at the shoulder. The American mastodon, shorter, stockier, with dense brown hair. Giant ground sloths the size of a bear. Bison with horns spanning 6 feet. Short-faced bears taller than any predator alive now. At sites like Clovis, Murray Springs, Lanier, yes, stone points sit beside the bones of these giants. But here's what archaeologists noticed when they actually counted those bones. At most Paleo-Indian sites, mammoths and mastodons number in single digits, not hundreds. Everywhere else, rabbits, marmots, prairie dogs, birds, small fish, turtles. A mammoth is a rare feast for dozens of people. A rabbit is Tuesday. And when biochemists tested isotopes in Paleo-Indian bones themselves, the picture got even stranger. The carbon and nitrogen ratios pointed to a diet with less big game meat than anyone expected. More small prey, more plants, more riverbank gathering. The epic was falling apart inside the laboratory. Now imagine you've had a bad hunting season. Winter, snow on the ground. The herds have moved 1,000 miles south. What do you eat? Bones. Literally bones. The ones still scattered around camp from last season's kills. At many Paleo-Indian sites, long bones are smashed into tiny fragments, not gnawed shattered with stone hammers, to get at the marrow inside, and then crushed further into splinters, and boiled for hours in hide bags with red-hot rocks. What came out was a thick, greasy broth. Bone soup. Calories, calcium, fat, everything. You cannot extract any other way. At the Colby site in Wyoming, archaeologists found a cache of these shattered mammoth bones. Not for tonight's meal, for meals months away. It was a pantry. They dried meat, rendered fat, stored bones separately for the blackest day. And if you think a black day was rare, I have bad news for you. Anthropologists have a name for it: protein poisoning, a condition still seen today in Arctic peoples, in pioneers. Eat only lean meat with no fat and no carbohydrates, and a human weakens within 2 weeks. The liver cannot keep up with the protein load. Nausea, apathy, diarrhea set in. A month on that diet and death follows. Starvation with a full stomach. Paleo-Indians knew this in their bodies long before any scientist named it. Fat was valued above meat. Marrow above fat. Brain tissue was a separate treasure. And if you want more of these forgotten stories about the real lives of the first Americans, stay with us. Because what comes next is stranger. Paleo-Indians did not eat only what ran. They ate what crawled, what swam in puddles, what grew underground. At the Paisley Caves in Oregon, archaeologists found coprolites, fossilized human waste, 14,300 years old. Inside, desert plant seeds, bits of bulbs, the remains of small rodents with fur and bones still attached. The rodent was not butchered. It went into the pot whole. Skin, bones, organs, everything. And inside those coprolites was ancient human DNA. Very old DNA. Older than the Clovis culture. Several centuries older. Meaning someone was eating small ground squirrels in Oregon before the famous Clovis technology even existed. The menu of the first Americans turned out to be older than the first Americans of the textbooks. Remember that thought. We'll come back to it at the end when we talk about white sands. But for now, we move on. 12,000 years ago, the Ice Age is ending. Climate is warming. Glaciers retreat. Forests march across former tundra. And a catastrophe unfolds whose consequences will shape the menu for the next 10,000 years. Mammoths vanish. Mastodons vanish. The short-faced bear, the giant sloth, the American lion all gone. Around 35 genera of large mammals wiped from the continent inside 2,000 years. Scientists still argue about what killed them. Climate? Humans? A deadly mix of both? But for our story, the cause matters less. The consequence matters more. The main calorie source disappeared. What does a human do when the main calorie source disappears? They eat everything else. Everything that still moves. Everything that still grows. And right here begins the most extraordinary chapter of the American diet, the Archaic period. Archaeologists used to call it boring. Between the glamorous Paleo era and the first city's 3,000 years of just foragers. But it was those boring foragers who figured out how to feed a continent. They started eating snails. Tens of thousands of snails. Along Midwestern rivers, in the Tennessee Valley, across Alabama, enormous mounds of shells appear in the archaeological record. Not tombs, not temples, trash piles. Kjøkkenmeddings, schurkenmerdings, kitchen middens from the Danish. Some of them are 3 stories tall, hundreds of yards long. Mountains of empty river mussel shells, piled up over 1,000 years. An archaeological library of garbage. And when researchers excavated those mounds layer by layer, they held a climate chronicle in their hands. In the bottom layers, large mussel species that prefer cold, fast water. Above mussels of warm, slow, muddy rivers, the climate had warmed, the rivers had slowed. Higher still fish bones absent from the lower layers. Less shellfish, more river fishing. The garbage of the first Americans turned out to be a more precise climate record than any tree ring. They never knew they were writing history. They were just throwing out their shells. But mussels are not a dream food. They are a food of desperation. 40 mussels equal the calories of 1 deer meat steak. You need hundreds a day to fill a stomach. Why work that hard for so little? Because the deer ran away. The mussel did not. Archaic people grasped a simple truth that Paleo Indians had the luxury of ignoring. Reliable small food beats spectacular rare game. Stability beats epic. From that simple thought, everything follows. Storage, settlement, the land underfoot as a pantry. And what else was in that pantry? Acorns. An enormous amount of acorns. In California, in the eastern woodlands, across the Appalachian valleys, the acorn became the dominant plant food for millennia. But raw acorns are bitter and mildly toxic. They are loaded with tannins that burn the gut lining. Archaic foragers engineered a way around it. They smashed the nuts, ground them into flour, then they rinsed the flour in flowing water. For hours, sometimes for days, the tannins washed out. What remained was a nutty, fat-rich meal. They baked it into flatbread on hot stones, boiled it into porridge, stored it for winter. One large oak could feed a family for weeks of harvest. And here begins the most interesting chapter, the one we came here for. When researchers started studying the actual teeth of archaic people, they saw something nobody expected. Dental calculus, the hard plaque that builds up on teeth, a mineralized film of bacteria and food. For a modern dentist, it's junk to be scraped away. For an archaeologist, it is gold, because over a lifetime, that calculus traps microscopic pieces of everything a person ate. Starch grains from plants, phytoliths, tiny silica skeletons of leaves, pollen, ancient DNA, ancient proteins. Tooth enamel preserves all of it for thousands of years. Better than bone, better than mummified flesh. And when bioarchaeologists started scraping calculus from archaic skeletons, the map of the menu exploded. Inside, they found starch grains from chenopod kenopod, a wild cousin of quinoa, starch from little barley, sunflower, squash, marsh elder, plants officially considered domesticated much later turned out to be in the diet thousands of years earlier. Archaic people were not simply gathering, they were selecting. They were saving the biggest seeds, replanting the best stands, encouraging the plants they liked most. Without realizing it, they were inventing agriculture before agriculture. Slowly, over generations. By 4,000 years ago, in the river valleys of the eastern woodlands, a true plant complex emerged. Scholars call it the Eastern Agricultural Complex, Squash, sunflower, chenopod, marsh elder, little barley. No corn yet. Corn would arrive from Mexico much later. But the gardens of America already existed. The teeth showed what the bones could not show, what the pots could not hold, what the soil had erased. And the teeth showed something else, something darker. Cavities, worn enamel, abscesses, lost teeth long before old age. Archaic diets carried a hidden price. More carbohydrates meant more sugar fermenting on the gum line. Paleo-Indians, eating mostly meat, had remarkably clean teeth into old age. Their archaic descendants, eating ground seeds and acorn mush, lost teeth in their 30s. Civilization had not even begun, and the toll was already written on the jawbone. But the teeth carried one more secret, the strangest one yet. At several archaic sites, calculus held traces of plants that should not have been edible at all. Pokeweed, myapple, buckeye, plants whose raw flesh causes vomiting, paralysis, sometimes death. Yet these particles showed up in adult mouths again and again. Not as accidents, as staples. Somehow, archaic foragers had learned to leach, boil, ferment, or roast the poison out. Recipes invented by trial and death, refined across generations, passed down without a single written word. Every meal contained 1,000 years of buried experiments, and the unlucky cooks who never came home. And dogs. We need to talk about the dogs. At many archaic sites, dog bones lie in the same trash heaps as deer and turtle bones. Some with cut marks at the joints. Some cracked for marrow. Eaten like any other meat. Dogs were companions. Dogs were hunters' helpers. And in the hardest winters, dogs were food. This was not cruelty. This was survival arithmetic in a world without supermarkets. Anyone who has ever been truly hungry will recognize the math. Now look at the full picture this menu paints. Snails by the bushel, acorn mush rinsed for days, crushed bones simmered for hours, rodents swallowed whole, toxic plants tamed by craft, faithful dogs sacrificed in famine years. No salt as we know it, no sugar in any concentrated form, no oils pressed from seeds, constant low-level hunger between abundant seasons, the lean cheek, the visible rib, the deep sleep of the truly tired. This is what 15,000 years of survival actually looked like. And then there is the question that hangs over all of this. If dental calculus can preserve starch grains for 10,000 years, what else can it tell us? Recent work has pushed back not just menus, but the very date of human arrival in the Americas. Footprints at White Sands, in New Mexico, have been dated to 23,000 years ago. Tools at Cooper's Ferry in Idaho, 16,000 years old. Older than Clovis, older than the corridor through the ice. The first Americans were here longer than we ever taught, and they were eating, surviving, raising children. The kitchen middens give us their recipes. The footprints give us their feet. Slowly, the full story is taking shape. So let's go back to that opening picture. The hunter, the mammoth, the fire. It happened. It really happened. But it was the briefest moment in a much longer life. The longer life was a woman crouched by a stream, sorting mussels into a hide bag. The longer life was a child kneeling beside an oak, gathering acorns into a basket. The longer life was a grandmother who knew which root to boil 3 times before anyone could touch it. The longer life was a young man cracking a deer femur to feed his hungry sister. That life left no monuments, no museums, no paintings on the walls of caves. It left mounds of shells, it left fragments of bone, and it left the inside of their teeth. If you made it this far, the map of America in your mind has shifted. The first Americans were not noble savages of the mammoth steppes. They were brilliant, hungry, resilient eaters of everything. They survived the Ice Age. They survived the megafauna collapse. They survived 10,000 years of climate whiplash. And every survival was a meal, often a strange one, often a desperate one. Their bodies became this continent. Their descendants are still here, still eating, still remembering. Look at your plate tonight, then look at theirs. Both meals are part of the same long story. We are still figuring out which of us got the harder bargain. Next time on the channel, we go inside the largest archaic site north of Mexico Poverty Point, Louisiana. Earthworks raised 3,500 years ago by foragers who never planted a single field of corn. Hunter-gatherers who built a city. We'll see how that was even possible.